Hello, I'm John Feldt. This is the Weekly Water Outlook National Edition for June 9th, 2013. Well, there are really two main stories this week. There's too much rain and not enough rain. Too much rain was due to Tropical Storm Andrea, which moved up the East Coast. It's really not unusual to have a system develop in the eastern Gulf of Mexico or the western Caribbean this time of year, very early in the season. It's usually very weak, doesn't develop much because the sea surface temperatures are still not warm enough. But if you look at this picture here, you see a lot of these white, bumpy clouds. And one thing that these weak systems can do is bring a lot of tropical moisture inland. And sometimes you get as much flooding from such a system like this, very minimal tropical cyclone, as you do a stronger hurricane. So here's the rain that fell across the nation last week. Quite interesting. If you look at the East Coast, you see those pockets of red all the way from Florida up towards the northeast U.S. That was 6 inches or more of rainfall. I'm sure there were pockets close to 10 inches in there in isolated spots. Pretty widespread over parts of Georgia, the Carolinas, and Virginia, and then it hugged the coastal states up in the northeast U.S. That was that track of Tropical Storm Andrea. On the western U.S., look at this. Boy, a broad area of no rain whatsoever last week. And this is a story that's in progress and it's developing. I'm going to be talking about that area. But no rain whatsoever, and this continues a pattern that has now been a number of weeks of well below normal rainfall. In the middle part of the nation, scattered showers and thunderstorms. In some areas this was welcome, such as West Texas. Other areas are getting a bit wetter, and that includes part of the northern tier of the U.S., North Dakota, parts of Minnesota, and Iowa. In the middle, it was sort of a hit-or-miss type scattered precipitation. I wanted to go back to Tropical Storm Andrea just for a moment here. This is the percent of normal, or the departure from normal precipitation. And I wanted to sort of point out the little pockets of purple. Those are anywhere from 4 to 8 inches more precipitation than would be expected during this week. So it shows a little bit clearer where those pockets of heavy rain are and the track of heaviest rainfall. If we look at percent of normal rainfall over the last week, you can see the widespread, well above normal rainfall over the eastern U.S. That's that area of purple. That's 3 to 6 times normal rainfall. Look on the other side of the nation over the western U.S., 0% of normal. So it's really have and have-nots when it comes to precipitation over the last week. Now, from a flood perspective, it's interesting. There are 4 different floods going on caused by 4 different factors. First of all, area number 1 up in northern Montana, that's due to the recent very wet weather that's been occurring over the last several weeks. If we look at number 2, we have actually 2 areas of North Dakota. Part of this was due to the recent rainfall. The other area was due to the lingering impacts of the spring snowmelt flooding that occurred in that area earlier this spring. If we get down to the Midwest, very heavy rain over the last 2 to 3 weeks. We've had major flooding on parts of the Mississippi River. Most of these rivers are now receding as the water works downstream and attenuates as it gets over to the lower part of the Mississippi River drainage. And then 4 is the tropical storm-induced flooding, primarily over North Carolina and then some scattered areas. Now, red is moderate flooding. The orange is minor flooding. So the only major flooding right now is up into the northern part of North Dakota along in the Mississippi River, generally from the Burlington area down to near St. Louis. In addition to the flooding, let's look at the other hand, drought. We still see extensive drought over the middle part of the nation, and I'm going to be talking about in this briefing how I think this is going to start to expand and intensify over the next several weeks over the west and southwest U.S. But there's a very abrupt line right here between drought and normal conditions, or maybe even a little bit wet. And this has been set up due to winter snow conditions and spring rainfall patterns. So it's a very abrupt line. Matter of fact, areas that are wet include parts of Iowa, parts of northern and eastern Missouri, and even parts of Oklahoma have been wet. At the same time, western parts of Kansas, western parts of Oklahoma, parts of Texas have been very dry. If you want to see some of these changes over the last 4 weeks, areas in green have been getting wetter, areas in yellow have been getting a bit drier, and areas in brown are getting much drier compared to 4 weeks ago. So you can see that some areas have been getting wet, some areas have been getting dry. And I think as we look ahead, these areas in particular that have been dry are going to continue to get dry, and I don't really see much change in that well through June. So here's an analysis of the steering winds. Currently we have a dip in the jet stream over the middle part of the nation that's producing some scattered showers and thunderstorms. Nothing all that significant. That's going to be moving into the eastern U.S. early in the middle part of this week, and that's where most of the action is expected this week, over the eastern third of the nation. Now if we look out a little bit further this week, towards the middle of the week, we see some very significant changes. We have an area of high pressure that becomes very dominant over the south, from Oklahoma into Texas. It bows well to the north. Now typically, or generally, when we get this high pressure down here, we're talking about hot and dry weather. And then along the jet stream, maybe a chance of some showers and thunderstorms. The energy is pretty minor right now, so I don't really expect the showers and thunderstorms to be too widespread. But the real dominant pattern right now is going to be this trough over the east and this ridge of high pressure down here in the south. And that hot and dry signal is very extensive right now. Matter of fact, if we look out 6 to 10 days out, the ridge of high pressure is really unchanged. We have that red dashed line, and those are pressure anomalies, red meaning higher than normal pressure, and that's saying that the jet stream is further north than would be expected this time of year. So here's the rainfall forecast for the next 7 days. Some of this occurs early with the transition between that trough and ridge, and then once that sets up, we're looking at a very large, broad area of the west and southwest and south central that's going to be very much below normal precipitation through this week and next week as well. What we see here are changes in soil moisture for this week. The area in blue are some possible increases with that transition, but I'm just estimating here 80% of the nation of the upcoming week looks like it's going to be drying soils, and soils are going to be very, very dry over the areas of the southwest and south. Not much change as we get out to the 8 to 14 day period. The areas in red for temperatures show you warm temperatures, and the area in green shows you precipitation above normal and brown below normal. I think the predominant signal that we're looking at here is really right in here where it's going to be very dry, this area of brown. This is week 2, 8 to 14 days. And then remember where that jet stream sort of dips over this area, there's a little bit of jet energy. And I think that's going to keep it showery, maybe some storms over this area, the mid-Atlantic, up into the Great Lakes, into the northeast U.S., and perhaps dipping down to the south. So dry to the west, wet to the east. Models show this as we get out in the longer range. This goes out through late in June. You can see those patterns look like they're very persistent. So the patterns that we're setting up this week that will be going into place look like they're going to persist for about 2 weeks, if not longer. So the takeaway points for this week's briefing: it looks like we're transitioning into a hot and dry type pattern over a large part of the nation. I think this is going to expand the drought impacts over the west and southwest U.S. Scattered showers and storms over the eastern U.S. both now with this transition and probably continuing as we get that jet energy established over the eastern U.S. And like I said, this is going to be a very persistent pattern. It looks like for at least the majority of the rest of June, this type of pattern will hold. Appreciate you listening to this week's briefing. We'll be issuing information throughout the week, and I'll be talking to you again next weekend. Thank you.